All right, so Hannah and I, this is Tori, and Hannah and I work at DEQ in the non-point source and wetlands section. And we're just going to walk the group through some TMDL basics. I'm not a TMDL writer, and I feel like I'm still learning a lot about the finer points of this process myself. So hopefully we can provide some context and a good overview. Okay, so TMDL is short for total maximum daily load. The Montana Water Quality Act tasks DEQ with development of TMDLs for streams and lakes that aren't meeting their water quality standards. And a TMDL sort of has two main parts to it. First is a calculation of the maximum amount of a pollutant that a water body can receive and still meet its water quality standards, and that's sometimes referred to as its pollution diet. And then a summary of the load reductions that would be needed from each source of that pollutant for the stream to sort of bounce back and meet those standards. And I wanted to point out that the term TMDL is kind of used interchangeably to describe those calculations for a single pollutant in a single water body, like a stream reach or a lake. And then it's also used to describe the plan that DEQ submits to EPA that includes individual TMDLs for many impaired streams in a basin. So the screenshot up there is the cover of what you'll hear called the Lower Gallatin TMDL, but it contains many individual TMDLs inside it. So that muddies the water sometimes. And I've heard some of DEQ's TMDL writers refer to them as the math and the path to water quality improvement. And that's because in addition to those calculations that set the limits, they include an approach to improve water quality so that streams can support their state designated beneficial uses. Okay, good. So yes, so I just said beneficial uses. DEQ uses this term with a different meaning than when it's applied to water rights situations. So every stream segment in Montana has a beneficial use class that is defined in statute, and it's based on how people, aquatic communities, wildlife use that water body. And the use class informs what water quality standards apply. So I won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but in general, a stream with a beneficial use for cold water fisheries will have more stringent water quality standards than a stream with a beneficial use for like industrial water supply. So more common impaired uses are the ones with more sensitive water quality needs. Okay, so this slide outlines how source assessment and TMDL development work are part of sort of one process that delivers that math and the path. So first would be a look at all the available data related to that stream and pollutant combination. And this might include surface and groundwater data, maybe permitting data from point source discharges, supporting geospatial data like septic maps or irrigation maps, and then using that to inform what and where additional monitoring might be needed. And then once all the necessary data is collected, it's used to determine the existing load of a pollutant within that stream reach, which is sort of that box on the left there, and the total maximum daily load the stream can handle and meet its beneficial uses, which is sort of there in the center box. And then collected in the right way, the data also allows for source assessment, and with some understanding of the sources of that pollutant in that stream, reduction goals for the non-natural sources are calculated, and that's shown there on the right. So within that broader TMDL plan for the Lower Gallatin, which was completed in 2013, there are 17 stream reaches on 15 streams that were addressed with 40 different TMDLs. And the impairments all fell within the categories of nutrients, sediment, and E. coli, and the numbers are shown there. And then this is just a screenshot of part of the summary table from the TMDL plan document that can just give you a sense of how the individual TMDLs that were developed align with the impairments of the most sensitive impaired beneficial uses, and that's mainly aquatic life and contact recreation. And so the last few slides are maybe a little messy, but they just walk through the basics of source assessment and TMDL development for the E. coli impairment on Bozeman Creek. So in general, elevated E. coli concentrations impair that primary contract recreation use due to increased risk of waterborne illness. And the 5-mile segment of Bozeman Creek downstream of its confluence with Limestone Creek was determined to be impaired with data collected in the summer of 2004. And then DEQ prepared for TMDL development with additional data collection in 2008 and 2009. So following along with that general process that was a couple slides back, 2008 data was used to quantify the current water quality conditions and confirm sort of that they still support that decision that Bozeman Creek was impaired. And I won't take a deep dive into it, but with E. coli, the total maximum daily load is flow dependent and based on achieving the standard, which is concentration based. And some calculations go into it, geometric means from multiple samples. And so to keep it simple, just look at that upper left box that describes the standard. And then the lower right box summarizes the 2008 data from the TMDL, and it supported that impairment listing. So Bozeman Creek still impaired. Excuse me. And then the sources that are making up the existing load then get identified and quantified. So natural or background loads are typically determined by monitoring reference sites within the watershed that are sort of upstream of human influence. And that was the case with the Bozeman Creek example. And then permitted point sources are identified through the state permit system, and associated data can be considered. In the Bozeman Creek example, the only sort of relevant discharge permit to that watershed is the stormwater general permit, and associated data was limited. So flowing outfalls were sampled in follow-up monitoring in 2009. And then after you've sort of looked at natural and point sources, the anthropogenic non-point sources are identified and quantified with aerial imagery, modeling, existing data, and then any sort of follow-up monitoring. So when looking to inform placement of sites, things like this were considered. So the stream reach of interest flows through residential and urban uses. Upstream of that reach are some large acreage agricultural land uses. There's sort of two main tributaries within that reach, Nash Spring Creek and Matthew Bird Creek. And then there are several city stormwater drains within that reach. So here's a snapshot of the follow-up monitoring that sort of supported source assessment. And it's not the cleanest map, but this included synoptic sampling of stormwater, potential stormwater influence, and then surface water sites were placed to capture contributions from tributaries as well. And so this figure is pulled from the TMDL, and it shows the results of that follow-up sampling upstream to downstream on the x-axis. So that's those red bars, and that's compared with the calculated TMDL for E. coli, which are those yellow bars, and those are changing from site to site, again, because they're flow dependent. So you can see how they sort of track with measured flow, which is that background in blue. And then the two yellow bars on the left are sort of upstream of the assessment reach. That was the only reason I could figure they were in yellow and not in red. And then, sorry, it's a little sloppy, but I've just tried to show where the tributaries join Bozeman Creek along the bottom there with some arrows. And then I just put those plus signs in there myself to just sort of show where those stormwater drains enter the system. And this just shows that the tributaries and the non-point source activities that are probably influencing those tributaries are kind of where the most achievable reduction goals were identified. And then the final slide here is the E. coli TMDL for base flow conditions, along with the reduction goals and then the recommended methods for achieving those goals for Bozeman Creek. And the only reductions called for in this case were lumped together as agriculture, residential sources. And this is just because there's a big variety of non-point source issues in a sort of busy urban suburban watershed like this. And what else was I going to point out with that? Oh, so just that no stormwater reductions are called for. And that's because during low flow, those stormwater discharges would be assumed to be illicit discharges, and so not really coming from stormwater sources. But those discharges are addressed in the recommendations there, along with some septic maintenance recommendations and some management of pet waste. And that's all I have.
Great. Thank you so much, Tori. Hannah, I wanted to see if there was anything you wanted to add. And then Jeff, just because you collected so much of this data, if there was any other observations you wanted before we opened to see what other questions there were.
Thanks, Karen. I'm just here to help answer questions. Tori did an amazing job given this background.
She sure did. Thanks, Hannah, and thanks for being here today. Jeff, is there anything you wanted to add? Just kind of thinking about that you collected a lot of this data as this was being developed.
Not really. I think it's curious to think that we've got 15 years under our belts now, and there's been some a lot of work that's been done to improve some of the tributaries, Dry Creek and Thompson and stuff like that. So that's kind of where my head goes, kind of what steps we've taken in this time frame and kind of where we're headed.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jeff. And I think we'll circle back to that in discussion too. Appreciate it.
Oh, I missed my last slide, so I do have one more thing.
Oh, okay, great, Tori.
Okay, I was like, why didn't this come up? So I just thought about some, like when I was going through putting this together, some of the sort of in context takeaways for the lower Gallatin. So, like pollutant sources are largely non-point. So, there really aren't very many like permitted discharges or waste load allocations. And so I think improvement here really relies on the voluntary practices that are fostered through relationship building. And then also I thought this E. coli on Bozeman Creek was a good example of how sometimes the available data to make these decisions is pretty sparse. So like that E. coli impairment was just based on one like 5-time sampling event within a month. So, evaluating conditions and trends, can be improved by credible data from external sources. So we're feeding into the water quality district's work that can just work like that, and data collected by others can sort of improve this process. So